Sure. I see 70 is us. Okay, so we are now recording.
You're now recording.
Thanks, Adam.
No problem, man.
All right, bye. All right. We are now recording, Dr. Stair.
All right, guys. Good afternoon. I think I finally figured out my lighting so I don't look like I'm sitting in a cave. So, all right, now Eric, you're cutting in and out a little bit. Can you guys all hear me okay and see me okay?
Yeah, I've muted my microphone and my video. If everybody else would do the same, it works a lot better. And if you need to talk, just unmute your microphone. It helps for me because one of my kids is liable to come running through behind me screaming or something. So I've just learned to mute my microphone unless I need to speak. Yep. And sometimes on the video recording, it records whoever's video is active. So if we leave just Dr. Stair's video on, we'll be sure to only have her on the recording. So I'm going to mute, and if I need to speak, I'll just pop.
All right, good deal. All right, guys, we'll go ahead and get started if everybody can hear me okay and everything's working fine. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Kristin Stair, Associate Professor here at LSU in Department of Ag and Extension Education, and I'm also going to be your superintendent this state FFA convention for your Agriscience Fair. I've had the chance to work with National Agriscience Fair as well as running the New Mexico Agriscience Fair. So I've gotten the chance to talk to a lot of you guys during workshops and things like that about it. And today, Dr. Smith asked me to come on and just share a little bit of kind of what we're thinking about for the State Agriscience Fair. For those of you that are planning on getting applications in, I know that you guys want to know what needs to be in, when is setup going to happen, all those logistical things so that you guys can plan your event and plan your state convention. So we're going to go ahead and jump in, and I'm going to start. Let me put it on share screen real quick. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started just going through some of the dates and information. Once we go through the information for our Louisiana Agriscience Fair, then I'm going to walk through the national page for you guys so you can see what those applications look like and just make sure you guys are comfortable with that submission. So the big thing you guys need to know for the Louisiana Agriscience Fair this year is May 15th, so about 2 more weeks. And by May 15th, you have to have your online application and your student's research paper submitted to the advisor's dashboard. And again, I'll show you guys how to do that. That's all we need for May is just to have that application in as well as having that research paper done. Both of those are going to be uploaded to your National FFA Advisors Dashboard, and then those also need to be sent to me. The easiest way to do that is just by email. You can print a PDF of your application and email that to me along with the student's Word document for their research paper, and that will be just fine. What that will let us do is that will let us see how many we have in each category. Once we know how many we have in each category, we'll be able to go in and give you your official times. So our Agriscience Fair is going to be 10 to 2 on June 5th. Students will be allowed to set up starting at 8 a.m. and they must be set up before the 10 o'clock start time. So we need to make sure we have that 2-hour window for you guys to get set up and comfortable. Students will have an assigned space. So when you get to the Agriscience Fair area, on the tables, they'll be grouped by divisions, and the students will be able to come up and look and find their name and their project title, and they'll be able to get set up. Depending on our numbers, we are hoping to have multiple rounds of interviews. So what I mean by that is divisions, animal science and animal systems may be interviewing at 10 o'clock. Plant systems may be interviewing at 11 o'clock. So it's just all going to depend on our numbers. If we have a very small group this year, everybody will start interviewing at the same time. But as soon as I get those final numbers, I will send everything out to you guys over the listserv, and I'll have Dr. Smith and Cade send everything out as well by June 1st. So it won't take us too long to get those schedules together once we have our final numbers. We do realize that we have afternoon CBEs, and so we're very concerned about trying to make sure that we don't have overlap. If you do have a student who's competing in both Agriscience Fair and those afternoon CDEs, please let the Louisiana FFA office know, or you can even add that in your email to me when you send the materials. We just need to know, and that way we can help make sure that if we have to have a 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock interview time, that we make sure it doesn't interfere with your students' competition. That's pretty important. So just let us know if there's anything you need. For the actual Agriscience Fair, all they're going to need is their poster, a copy of their research logbook, the book that they've been using to collect their data, and we recommend 5 copies of the research paper. Now, you guys are going to be sending me a copy. I'm going to print those copies for the judges, but just in case, if for whatever reason the judges don't have their copies with them and would like to look back through the research paper, we like to make sure that those are there. We also may have people who come by and walk through Agriscience Fair and want to look and see what those papers look like, so having some copies out will be great. The students can also have their papers to refer back to if needed during their interview time. If you guys have walked through National Agriscience Fair, 5 years ago, you guys may remember that it was kind of a madhouse. People started making their displays bigger and bigger and building them up, and it got a little out of control. National FFA has really streamlined that process, and we're going to be doing that as well. So you just have your poster and whatever you're using to hold your poster up. If sometimes people will take a board and or 2 boards and hook them together and have the poster sitting between them. If you want to do that, that's fine. But we don't need any live animals, no bacteria or cultures or props or nothing like that for Agriscience Fair. Just that poster, the logbook, and then some copies of their research paper. Your students should be prepared for about a 10 to 15 minute interview and be able to answer those questions about their project. And some of the things, we really like to ask them, where did you get started with this? What do you think your next steps are going to be? Those types of things, just to really make sure that they understand their projects well. If there are 2 students, if they're on a team in their division, they need to be prepared for both of them to answer questions. Part of the score is making sure that both people know the information together, not just one and then another one kind of hung out to be a part of it. There is a session, I believe, at 5 o'clock on June 5th, and so we've been asked to have our posters down by 4 o'clock just to make sure that we have the hallways clear and we don't have a bunch of people come into session.
Hey, Dr. Stair.
Yes, sir.
Will you go to your Zoom down there on your bottom right and make your document bigger?
Absolutely. Is that better?
Much better. And if someone shows up with their experiment, their microscope, their slides, what I'm hearing you say is we don't want any props, just the things you've requested, right? So if you bring
correct. So yeah, we're going to be walking through, and if there's anything that does not need to be there, we're going to ask them to take that back and put it back in the van. Those items will not be allowed there during the judging. Okay, are there any other questions before I kind of roll on to uploading the application? I'll kind of scroll through. So one more time, we're going to start rolling at 10 o'clock on June 5th. Please have all your projects up by 8 a.m. We'll get you your final schedules for everything starting at June 1st. Keep it simple and have your students prepared for about a 10 to 15 minute interview, and we are hoping to be done and your projects will be able to be removed by 4 o'clock. Okay. Let's see if there aren't any questions. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the FFA dashboard. So I've got, speaking of small children running through, one second. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to open my dashboard, and I'm going to go to the instructor toolbox. I knew that was going to happen as soon as I got started. So when we go to instructor, and we're going to go down to that application hub, and you guys are already pretty familiar with that kind of stuff. Application center, so just like you do with your proficiency awards and your other information, we're going to go down and start Agriscience Fair. We're going to add a new application, and congratulations, Miss Myra Boudreau, you are now my student Agriscience Fair competitor. The Agriscience Fair portal is very straightforward. As you guys go through, it'll make a lot of sense just as you go through. So you start off your cover page, and this is going to be similar to a lot of things that you guys have done for your other applications. So you're going to have student's name, member ID, chapter information, project title, project category, and division pathway and other information. So it is very, very, very important that they make sure they are in the correct category. So if it's a plant project, they need to make sure they're in that plant systems, and then making sure they choose the correct grades and whether it's an individual or a team. And then going through and choosing their AFNR pathway. 1 second, please, guys. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Six-year-old had what he thought was a very important emergency. So just making sure that you go through and select the right categories is super important. And they ask, what is an extension project? And there's information about that. Basically, you can't do the same project 2 years in a row. So an extension project is basically, we've done something similar the year before, but now this is an extension of it. We have done more with it. So it's just kind of indicating that we've done something along the same line of research before, but this is not the same project.
So could you use the same data set but measure a different variable?
It would depend. And I hate to be vague about that, but there's so many different things they can do with this. So yes, theoretically they could use the same data set if they're looking at a completely different component of it. What they do not want to see is just, well, we did one more replication of it. That's going to get it kicked out when they get to nationals. So they need to make sure, for example, if you looked at 3 different things, you did a survey and you looked at 3 different areas. In the first year, you shared your research from one of those areas. The second year, you would need to make sure to do something different enough. It can't overlap too much or they will throw it out.
So if you're trying to predict ACT score by gender, the next year you used a different independent variable. You were trying to predict ACT score by age. Would that would not be an extension, would it? That would be a replication of the same project since you used the same dependent variable?
Yes, probably. So the best thing that we tell teachers to do, and at nationals we would always do this, is if you are ever in doubt, contact nationals. There are so many variations that when I was on the national committee we would get contacted about. Generally what I would like to see more than, hey, let me just look at a different variable is, hey, last year I found this. Based on this, now we have this whole new set of questions that we've decided to answer. And we've gone through that research process again. Does that make sense? But if you're ever in doubt, you're more than welcome to email me and ask me for our state level. And then when we move on to nationals, checking with whoever's that main chairperson for the Agriscience Fair Committee is always a really, really great idea. They're super helpful about making sure we get students in the right category and where they need to be. Because we do not want to have any projects that get kicked out before national level if we can help it. For your adult sponsor checklist, basically this is going through to make sure that we aren't using anything harmful, that we are not using anything that could be dangerous, and that we're following any guidelines. If we are using something dangerous, we are following those correct safety procedures. So depending on what chemicals they use, we want to make sure, for example, if they're using chemicals, that the students have looked at the MSDS sheets. Any of the vertebrates, they want to make sure that any animals or living creatures have been treated appropriately. There have been a lot of animal projects that have gotten kicked out. For example, you can't take away a major nutrient from an animal that would cause their health to severely suffer. Something like that would not make it through nationals. So just making sure that you're looking at either improving the quality of that animal or something along those lines. Hazardous materials is just an expansion of that. Please list any substances used in the research, include any of the precautions that were taken, and then you have to attach any MSDS sheets. And those sheets you get when you order those chemicals, those sheets should be included. They can also be printed offline. You can go online, look up MSDS for chlorine, for example, and then make sure that you save those and upload those just to make sure that the students were using correct procedures, and that has to be for anything other than water and salt. Human vertebrates, they don't want any human cultures, so mouth, throat, skin. Tissue cultures from biological supply houses are fine. You can kind of read through that list. You can't draw blood from one of your students and then test that, or you have to get chemicals and blood and any of those types of things from a reputable location like a hospital or a laboratory. Okay. Skill development form is something that we're already pretty familiar with, and that's just going through the AFNR performance indicator and discussing how the student meets that indicator. Research funding, most students, this will probably be blank. Most of the time students are self-funding their research or using things around the greenhouse or the lab. If they have any new expenses, they need to talk about how they got those expenses, how they purchased them. If for whatever reason they received funding to work on this project, for example, if a landscape company said, hey, I'll pay you $500 and give you materials if you can figure out what's going on with this plant, that should be stated. For the abstract summary, that's going to come straight from the paper. You just copy and paste the abstract from your paper into this box. Do note that there's a difference between the Divisions 1 and 2 papers and the Division 3 and 6 papers. The lower grades, their papers are not quite as complex, not quite as in-depth, so just kind of keep that in mind when your student's writing. Then they are going to upload their written report. You're going to go through this final check sheet, make sure that everything's met, go through for advisor's approval, and print your application. Okay, do we have any questions about the application? It's pretty straightforward. Really, it's just kind of making sure you talk if there are any hazards or anything like that, and making sure you're showing that you had the welfare of the students and everybody kind of in mind.
Dr. Stair.
Yes.
You mentioned the indicators really quickly. Is that just things that relate to their individual project?
Yes. Yeah, it's just like with our proficiency awards where they go in and talk about how they've used, how they've met some of those indicators, and you can just take that directly from their projects. So, for example, if they're doing a plant science project, you can tie in some of those horticulture and plant science standards.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Just want to be real clear, Dr. Stair, after the application hub and you go through all the processes and you make sure that page goes from saying missing to met, and you get the signature from the advisor, and you still have another step. You still have to print it out and email it to you, not me or the state office. It needs to come to Dr. Kristin Stair, because we don't really have a way of knowing who all did that process. It doesn't get submitted straight to my inbox and says, hey, Jesse Lejeune just finished an application at Sulphur High School. So even though you fill out the information through the application manager, it's still your responsibility to scan it or get a PDF copy of it in some sort of way and email it to Dr. Stair before May 15th.
Correct. Yes, everything needs to come to me. We actually had that conversation before about trying to figure out would the state office be sending me those, and how that would work out. But we really need you guys to make sure you send it to me. Okay. Anything else? Good questions, guys. Thanks for that clarification, Dr. Smith. Last thing I'm going to go through just really briefly. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I just want to make sure that everybody has had the chance to look at the Agriscience Fair program handbook. This is going to be the most important resource that you guys use as you go to have your students move forward with Agriscience Fair. And it's going to break down all those pieces that I talked about. It talks about project rules. It's going to talk about those human vertebrate forms and what that needs to do. It will talk about that disqualification. What do you need to be aware of? Ethical statements, how accessibility and things like that will work at the national level. It also goes through and talks about the project components in more depth, and also has the score sheets and rubrics. So just very, very, very quickly, I'm not going to read this to you guys because you guys have probably already taken a good look at it, or you know where to find it. It does a good job of talking about our category descriptions and what those mean. So if you're not sure, you can always go through and take a look at the handbook. It gives examples. Sometimes when we start getting into some projects, it's sometimes a little unclear. Well, okay, plant systems. Does that mean we are, does this particular project fall under plant systems or not? And so, again, if you ever have any questions, which category you're in, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll make that call for the state contest. And then if we need to, I can contact the nationals as well and get clarification from them just to make sure we're doing what we need to do. So our divisions, just to be clear, 7th and 8th graders are in divisions 1 and 2, and then 9th and 10th are together now. That's a fairly new change with this new handbook, which I really like. I think it does a better job. It was always really difficult for those 9th graders and those 12th graders to compete against each other, and now we have divisions 5 and 6. And again, if you do Division 2, 4, or 6, just make sure that both members are prepared to be interviewed, and they both need to be able to answer all the questions about the project. We talk about project rules. A lot of the stuff that we've kind of already talked about. It goes into more detail about human vertebrates if you have questions about that. We don't usually have a lot of students that are working directly with animals and taking blood or tissue cells or anything like that. Vertebrate animals, and it does talk about bird and reptile eggs within 3 days of hatching. So kind of keep that in mind too, is if your student is planning on using eggs, they need to make sure, because once it gets to a certain point, Nationals does not want them to use them. Food and water can't be withheld for more than 24 hours. So again, I kind of like I talked about before, where we don't want anything that could be severely detrimental to the animals that could cause death or severe malnutrition. Anything like that will not be allowed. So kind of what we talked about earlier with the extension, they'll have the opportunity to conduct additional research as long as the current year's project could not have been done without what was learned from past year's research. So that's, hey, after doing this, we found this, and now this project builds on what we learned before. Disqualification, all that information is in there. They have to be there. They have to be there on time. If anything is hazardous, if we have, if somebody's drawing blood at the booth or something like that during their interview, we won't allow that. If anybody tampers with anybody else's information, no plagiarism, no unethical research, and no altering of applications or materials. They talk a lot about plagiarism. They go through the required forms in more detail in case you guys have any questions as you go to fill that out. Pre-qualification, I do want to mention this just really briefly. We have too many students. It used to be that everybody who won at the state level automatically competed at the national level. As the popularity of Agriscience Fair grew, that's had to change. So now what will happen is we'll be sending all of our winners forward to nationals. They will get prejudged. During that prejudging time, any of the students that are silver or gold will move forward. If a student is bronze, they will not move forward. So a student can still place at the national level and not have presented their research. They will judge those exclusively off the interview packet or the application packet and their paper. So it is really, really, really important that those papers are as high quality as you can get them. Really work closely with your science teachers and your English teachers to help read through those things because that's what they're going to get judged on when they move forward to nationals. So we want those to be as strong as possible so our students all get to compete at the national level. There is an appeal process if you feel like your student has been taken out of competition for whatever reason unfairly. They go through and they spend a lot of time talking about the project components. And so this is super helpful when you have the student actually writing that final paper and putting the last touches on it. So for example, here it talks about what should be in the abstract, what should be in the introduction, the lit review, materials and methods, results, conclusions, and then the references. And we'll do that for each category. Each category is a little bit different, or each division, I should say. The younger students, their information is a little more basic. The 12th graders, they're expected to have a little bit stronger papers. We talk about the display requirements, and that's going to be 36 high from the top of the table to the top of the display. And we will be going through with rulers and all that good stuff just to make sure everybody's projects are fair and we're all on the same playing field. 48 inches wide, and that's the average scientific poster. So that's pretty common when you start looking at posters across different research institutions. We will provide tables just like National FFA will, and we will measure from the tables up. And then we talk a little bit more about the interview. They have some great starter questions in here to kind of get students thinking. That's a great thing to go ahead and practice with your students to get them ready. We already talked about conflict. Students will be expected to be in official dress. And then last thing are the score sheets and the rubrics. And this is exactly what we're going to be using as well. So this is how your student will be scored during Agriscience Fair competition. We will not be using the pre-qualification rubric. But do be aware that that pre-qualifying rubric will be what, if your student wins with us at state, this pre-qualifying rubric is what's going to be used when they move on to nationals. So it's really important after our state contest that you go through this rubric and really make sure that you're getting high points in all those areas so you can ensure that you're moving forward. What we will be using, let me get past our pre-qualification rubrics here. Is the convention score sheet. And this is what our judges are going to have printed for every student. Knowledge gained, scientific research, and the information and the thoroughness are going to be the two biggest categories. And the easiest way to score those points is going to be with your logbook and with that research paper and the students being able to talk about their project. The visual display is important because it's what the students see, but that's only 15 points out of that total point. So it's important. Sometimes students get really hung up on that visual display and wanting it to be, shoot fireworks and be the biggest and, all that kind of stuff. That's not what we look for anymore at Agriscience Fair. And so it's really important to remind them that it's more about the knowledge they've gained then making sure your display has all the bells and whistles. It should be neat. It should be easy to read. The judges should be able to get a good idea of what your project is about from looking at your poster, but it's not going to be where they get the most points. Those rubrics do kind of differ slightly from the different divisions. And that is it. So that's the handbook. I cannot stress enough how important that handbook's going to be, just to make sure that you have it exactly like it needs to be for nationals, and making sure it's ready to roll once it gets past us. So at this point, I'll just kind of open it up if you guys have any questions or anything you want me to go back and clarify on a little bit, or anything like that.
One of the benefits of being here live is that you could ask a particular question about maybe a project that you're working on with your students right now. So feel free to ask any kind of particular question that you're dealing with your Ag Science Fair projects going on. All right, well, if we don't have any questions, I've got a banquet to get to. And Dr. Stair,
please feel free, email me. You guys may have questions after you go through some of those forms. Let us know if there's anything you guys need from us. And then after Agriscience Fair, we're going to visit with you guys again at LATA and find out what you guys need as far as clarification, if you need any additional training, and just make sure that we're doing everything we can. I'm super excited about Agriscience Fair, and I think it's a great place for our students to be, and a great place for our teachers and our programs to get really good recognition. So we want to make it the best it can possibly be. So if you guys need anything from me at any point, please feel free to drop me an email, drop me a call, and we'll do the best we can.
All right, Dr. Stair, if you don't mind sending that Microsoft Word document you had that has the schedule and everything out to everybody on the listserv, that would be much appreciated. If that's it, thank you so much for logging. Appreciate you coming in and helping us build Agriscience Fair, and I will talk to you later.
All right, guys. Thank y'all so much.
You are the only participant.